Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Wiggins, and I work for Jigsaw Thornbury as a family wellbeing and support worker. Jigsaw Thornbury is a charity that supports families who have children and young people with disabilities and additional needs up to the age of 25. We provide support and wellbeing groups, events for parents and carers, activities for the children and young people and their siblings, but most importantly, Jigsaw Thornbury aims to provide an environment where families feel understood, informed, empowered and celebrated. Today, I'm handing over to Omar, who's from Irwin Mitchell. He's a senior welfare advisor. He's going to be discussing various benefits that you and your families can be benefiting from. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to you, Omar.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. So, as Sarah mentioned, I'm Omar Shefta. I'm just going to launch some slides now. Hopefully, everybody will be able to see these. So this is me. I've been with Irwin Mitchell for about 7 years now, and in the event you need to contact me, those are my direct contact details. I am part of the welfare benefits team at Irwin Mitchell. So just a few of the things that we do deal with. We can assist with the completion of all forms, prepare for and attend assessments for clients. We'd also deal with mandatory reconsideration requests and appeals to and representation at tribunal, also appeals to the upper tribunal. We do benefit entitlement reviews, as well as giving general advice and guidance. So without further ado, let's just have a look at some of the benefits today. First one we're looking at is Disability Living Allowance, acronym to DLA. So you can only now make a new claim for DLA for a child up to 16 years of age. If you're above the age of 16, you won't be able to make a new claim for DLA. You would have to look at PIP, and we will come to that later on. There are currently two components for DLA. That's the care and the mobility component. And you can be paid at one of three rates for each of these components, so low, middle, and high. There's only, however, two rates for the mobility component, those being the low and high, no middle rate for that. There are special rules for life-limiting illnesses of children undergoing renal dialysis. So if, unfortunately, the child has limited lifespan expectancy, the claim can be fast-tracked and progressed a lot sooner without the need to go through the full assessment process. So following the uplift in April, the beginning of April, these are the current rates of payment for DLA. So we have the care component at the low rate, the middle rate and the high rate. And we also have the mobility component at the low rate and the high rate. So DLA uses scoring functions to make assessment as to the level of award. So these are the particular activities that are scored. So it's hearing, eating, seeing, washing, reading, communicating, walking, drinking. I'm sure you can read the rest without me needing to repeat them all. Areas that are scored with terms of mobility, things to consider are any functional limitations that are required. So in terms of actual ability to walk or being out and about safely, any equipment that's used, time taken to complete mobility activities, any impact of pain and fatigue, risk of falls and variability in terms of day-to-day functioning. Behavioural difficulties are also taken into consideration. So it's not all about just being able to walk physically. It's things like lack of understanding of danger, being road safety aware, impulsive behaviour, also not being able to communicate. That takes into consideration also. And obviously visual or hearing impairments that affect safety. So if somebody's attempted to cross the road and are able to see or hear traffic, that will play a major part in terms of consideration. So would also be factored in when making an award. For DLA, in order to qualify for the Motability Scheme, you do, however, need to qualify at the higher rate for the mobility component. If you only scored an award at the lower rate, you would not qualify for the Motability Scheme. And if you're on the higher rate, you would automatically qualify for a blue badge. On the lower rate, you might not qualify at all, or you might have to make an application via the local authority. We will look at blue badges in a little bit more detail further on. So I'm showing my age here. I do like a good tenuous picture, bringing on a Care Bear. The reason for that is we're looking at the care component and the actual activities that are factored in when considering the level of the care component award. So things like getting in and out of bed, settling at night, toileting needs, moving about indoors rather than outdoors, which is considered in the mobility, bathing, showering and hygiene, getting dressed and undressed, eating and drinking, any medical and therapy needs for your child, and also any visual difficulties. Some more of the care component activities for consideration: difficulties with hearing, speaking and communicating with people, any blackouts, fits or seizures that may be experienced, any supervision requirements required during the day, help with development, any encouragement, prompting or physical help required at school or nursery, any help with hobbies and social activities, and also any help your child needs during the night. So in order to qualify for the lower rate care component, it's quite straightforward. Just child needs attention with functions for at least an hour a day. Then if we were looking at the middle rate care component eligibility, it can be any of the following. So it could be attention with functions several times throughout the day, regular checking throughout the day in order to avoid substantial danger to themselves or to other people, requirement with attention with functions for more than 20 minutes or more than twice during the night. So it's important to sort of try and keep a diary in terms of the length of time that you're spending during the night or the number of instances. And also they need another person to be awake for more than 20 minutes in order to watch over them more than twice during the night in order to avoid substantial danger to themselves or others. So if a child, say, wakes up during the night and is at risk of, say, falling down the stairs or doing something because they've got no awareness of danger or risk themselves, but someone needs to stay over them, that's taken into consideration in terms of qualifying for the middle rate care component. So for the higher rate care component, you need to have one of the day needs and one of the night needs from the middle rate eligibility. So there's a distinction here. You need the support during the day as well as during the night to qualify for the higher rate. Alternatively, if the claimant has a life-limiting illness, that will qualify for the higher rate automatically. Or if it can be proven that they have care or supervision needs substantially greater than those of a child the same age with no physical or mental health concerns. Eligibility criteria for the lower rate mobility component. So they require guidance or supervision when walking on unfamiliar routes because of mental or physical disablement. And if they have any needs substantially more guidance or supervision than a child the same age with no physical or mental health concerns. Higher rate mobility eligibility, the distinction isn't required now in terms of during the day or night for the mobility component. That just applies for the care component. But to qualify for the higher rate mobility component, they would either need to be unable to walk, virtually unable to walk, there's a risk to their life due to the exertion needed to walk, they have no legs or feet, or they qualify for the higher rate care component and are severely mentally impaired and demonstrate extremely disruptive and dangerous behaviour. Alternatively, they could have a severe visual impairment, or they could be blind and deaf and need the assistance of another person in order to walk outdoors. So, some tips on applying when completing the DLA form. Very first thing to do is be aware of the deadline and set yourself some targets in order to complete a certain section by a certain point. It's a very big and daunting form. I wouldn't recommend trying to complete it all in one go. You're better off staggering it. So saying we're to complete this section by this day, this section by this day. Always important to remember Rome wasn't built in a day. It's the same with the very lengthy DLA form. It's very easy to forget things and take them for granted. So it's always useful to make notes, think of the things that you're having to do, and keep a diary. So as I mentioned earlier about time spent during the night or the number of instances, record this before you even complete the form, and you can refer back to it when completing the form. The form can very easily get lost in the post or not arrive at the DWP for any whole host of reasons. So it's always important to keep a copy for yourself. So it's an awful thought once you've completed that form, sent it off, and then to be told that it's not been received, you have to send it in again. Just take a photocopy of it, or screen capture it with your camera or whatever before you send it off, so you've got a copy, so that if it does get lost, you don't have to do the whole thing again from scratch. You've seen the criteria. It's always useful and very important, I say, to target the form according to that criteria, so to complete it with information that's specific to those scoring criteria. Similarly, don't add irrelevant information. I've seen a lot of forms over the years where people add other information which would have no bearing on the level of award or any of the activities that are taken into consideration. So they might put other things to make the form look big and detailed that would have an impact on the daily life for the claimant. However, it wouldn't make any difference in terms of the form. So try and keep it focused on the actual scoring areas. You cannot have too much supporting information, I would say. So any educational health and care plans from school, any social care reports, any medical reports, if they tie in and demonstrate those scoring criteria that we've gone through, then it's always useful to send those in, because it strengthens your argument, it proves the point, and with good supporting evidence, sometimes a decision can be made simply based on the form without the need for you to attend an in-person assessment. Be aware of variability. So if the claimant or your child has, have good days and bad days, keep a log of those. The DLA criteria is based on how they are for the majority of the time. So if it's 1 day on, 1 day off, keep a log of that. Basically, you'll think is it affecting them for 4 days in a week or 6 months in a year? If so, put it in that form. Make sure keep a log of that variability. It's the same also with things like pain and fatigue. So if they're in more pain some days, emphasize that, put that information in there. There's nothing worse than going for a face-to-face assessment. Everything seems absolutely fine, and the assessor's just looking at them thinking, oh well, this is a representation of a normal day. Put that information in the form if there's variability on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, show how your child is different to those of a similar age. It's very easy to take things for granted, because you do things on a day-to-day basis. It becomes ingrained in your normal day-to-day routine. You think this is the same for everybody. You don't recognise actually how much more you're having to do when compared to, say, their friends or peers. So step back, think, is so-and-so having to do this? If not, make a log of that, recognise, all the input and work that you're doing, and, showcase that on the form. So once the claimant or child reaches the age of 16, they have to transition to PIP, or Personal Independence Payment. Now, you might have been awarded a lifetime DLA award, but unfortunately, once they reach this transition age and you receive the letter that they have to apply for PIP, you would have to transition. The DLA award would end otherwise. They will not continue to pay it, despite it saying on the letter it was a lifetime award. It's a lifetime award for DLA. That's one of the reasons why PIP was introduced, so that people could be transitioned off DLA onto PIP. Make sure you do make the claim once the letter is received, because otherwise the DLA payments will stop. If you make the claim for PIP, the DLA payments will continue up until the point that any PIP assessment has been made. Now, PIP is very different to DLA. DLA, I personally find, is a bit vague in terms of the scoring functions, whereas PIP is very focused, and it's quite easy to actually score as you go along through the form and get a picture in your own mind as to what sort of level of reward you should be getting. And it's more to do with actual function and specific activities rather than just these conditions and the care that's provided. So let's have a look at the scoring descriptors. So this is a photo of someone who very famously once said, back to basics. So let's look at the basics of PIP. It has two components like DLA, the daily living and mobility component. It only has two rates, however, as opposed to the three that you get for the care component of DLA. PIP daily living component only has the standard rate and the enhanced rate. You need to score at least 8 points to qualify for the standard rate for either component, and you need to score at least 12 points or more to qualify for the enhanced rate, again for either component. So these are the PIP rates as of April this year, and for the very observant amongst you, you will notice they are identical to the equivalent rates in DLA. These are the PIP scoring descriptors. So as you can see, there's 12 activities that are taken into consideration. And again, the more observant will be wondering why the last two are in black writing as opposed to white. And the answer for that is because they are different in terms of they are the mobility activities. So you've got 10 activities which can be scored across for daily living, but only 2 activities that are taken into consideration scored against for the mobility component. Let's break down those into a bit more information, see how they work. So this is activity number 1, preparing food, and you should be able to see that there's a list of the actual scoring descriptors, so you can score the numbers in brackets are the actual points available for this activity. So if say somebody needed to use an aid or appliance to prepare or cook a meal, they would score just 2 points. You could score up to 8 points on this particular activity. For each activity though, you can only score 1 descriptor. So let's say somebody couldn't cook a meal using a cooker and they need an aid to prepare a meal, you can't score 2 points and then another 2 points. It would just be the highest scoring descriptor. So in that case, it would just be 2 points for this activity. Having been to as many PIP assessments as I have, it won't come as a great surprise to me if the DWP's assessor said that these 2 individuals in the photo could prepare and cook a simple meal unaided. Activity number 2, taking nutrition. So again, you can see the breakdown of the point score for this one. And as I said, you can sort of, as you're going through the form, you can look at each activity, look at the description and say, well, I should score 4 points for this one, 2 points for this one. And you can build up in your own mind the level of award that should be granted. So for this particular activity, you could score up to 10 points. So potentially just from this activity alone, you could automatically qualify for the standard rate daily living component award. Here's one of my heroes demonstrating his ability to take nutrition unaided. So in terms of applying for the PIP form, as for the DLA, Rome wasn't built in a day. Take your time with it. You'll generally have a 1-month deadline to return the form. If you're having difficulties, you can phone DWP and request an extension. They will very gently grant a 2-week extension without any issues, and lengthy extensions can be granted as well. So don't rush and panic it, and don't try and cram it all into one day. Medical reports, GP statements, EHCP plans, again, if they can tie into the descriptors, if they showcase and highlight particular times with the activities and the scoring descriptors, send them in. You can't have too much additional evidence. If you don't, one of the issues that I've seen on forums is people try and put information in for each particular activity, and that undermines your credibility. If say there's no issues with say washing and bathing, leave it, don't add information there just for the sake of it. It's far more important, I find, to be specific and accurate, in terms of the representation of the difficulties that you have. So put information in for, any difficulties that there are, but don't feel obliged to put details in for every single condition. Sometimes people will put in difficulties with communication when, the child or the young person can have a conversation without any issues, and it undermines your credibility. So focus on the ones where there are apparent issues. By the same token, they don't feel that you can't write in for every single activity. If there are issues with every activity, then by all means, do complete the form accordingly. This is also really useful. So when you go to tribunal, in the event that you get unhappy with the decision, if there's a clear line of consistent answers, so we said there's issues with this, there's issues with this, and you're keeping that the same throughout, it makes you more credible and you're more likely to succeed at tribunals. Whereas if you've put there's difficulties with all the areas and there aren't, and then you're changing it later on in, say, appeal stage, a judge would look at that and say, well, why has there been a change? Why was it there's issues with everything to now there's suddenly not issues with this activity or this activity? So keep yourselves as credible as possible. Look at the descriptors provided. The descriptors are available online. If you just Google the term PIP descriptors, it can bring up the full list of each activity with the points available for each. So keep your answers focused on those descriptors. Same with your evidence. Keep it as relevant as possible. And when I complete the form, I actually cite the descriptor. So if I might put this person needs to use an aid to prepare the meal, they're unable to do so without, and then I put cannot prepare a simple meal without using an aid or adaptation. So you're making the DWP's assessor's life a little bit easier as well. You're saying, so this is what the point should be. You're framing the picture and the narrative in their mind as well as for yourself. As I mentioned, if you're keeping your point score, then what points you feel should be awarded and the level of award. And that's really useful for going through all the process. So when you go to assessment, if so, this is what should be looked at, and it's helpful for you if you're going through this tribunal. Then whether it should be a standard rate or enhanced rate award, and if a level of award is accurate at the first stage, or if it's not accurate where points haven't been made. You can request a copy of the assessor's report following the assessment from DWP, so you can see exactly what points have been awarded, and then if there's anything that conflicts to points that you've raised, you can challenge on those specific points. As with DLA, the condition needs to affect for the majority of the time, so it's at least 50%. So 4 days in a week, 6 months in a year, whatever we use. So keep tabs of any variability and highlight those issues, but make sure that it is affecting for the majority of the time. If something isn't affecting for the majority of the time due to variability, then you won't be awarded points for that particular issue. So the application process for DLA and PIP is the same in both instances. You would contact DWP to request an application. They will send out a form which you will complete and then return to them. Following receipt of the form, they will conduct an assessment. Now, this assessment could be based purely on the form. So if the form has been sent in with lots of good supporting information, they might just look at that, make a decision based on that. They might request a telephone assessment, which has been happening more often since the pandemic, or they still do also carry out face-to-face assessments where you would either attend an assessment centre or a DWP assessor would come to your home and conduct an assessment. Following that, a decision is reached. Now, if the decision's fine, if it's the level that was expected, absolutely fine, end of process. If not, you would then do a mandatory reconsideration. This is where we write to or contact the DWP, ask them to look at the decision again and review it. Now, they might review the decision and uprate it, or they might say no, we're sticking with the decision as it is, in which case then we would go to tribunal. We'd write to tribunal and request a hearing. Now, the hearings again might be done based on the papers. It could be a telephone hearing, it could be a video call, or it could be an in-person hearing. What sometimes also happens is that if an appeal is lodged to tribunal, DWP look at their decision again prior to the tribunal hearing, and quite often, if it's a strong case, they will overturn their own decision prior to the tribunal hearing. The process, as I said, is exactly the same for both DLA and PIP, just the variability based on the benefit that you're claiming. So moving on to carers allowance. So in order to claim carers allowance, you must be providing at least 35 hours of care to someone in receipt of one of the following benefits. So middle or high rate care component of DLA, any rate of PIP daily living component, attendance allowance, or other relevant qualifying benefits. So those are things like armed forces independence payments, adult disability payments, and the full list is available on gov.uk if you need to have a look at that. There is an earnings limit for carers allowance. So if you earn more than £139 per week net, then whilst you might have entitlement to carers allowance because you're providing the care, you wouldn't actually receive any payment because you're over the earnings threshold. Only one person can make a claim for carers allowance for an individual. So if you're living with a partner, you're both providing care, only one of you is able to claim carers allowance. You can't both claim carers allowance for the same person. Carers allowance can affect your benefit entitlement. So any monies that you receive from carers allowance could affect entitlement to benefits that you claim for yourself, and also potentially those of the person you're claiming for. Generally, it's more for claimants who are getting employment and support allowance and are living alone as opposed to a child, but it's always worth just double checking with a benefits advisor if you're worried about any impacts on benefit entitlements if you make a claim for carers allowance. The current rate of payment for carers allowance is £76.75 per week. Again, that's following the uplift in April this year. My final irrelevant picture of a Care Bear. So as I mentioned earlier, we're just having a quick look at Blue Badge. So the eligibility criteria for the Blue Badge, you need to be scored the higher rate for DLA mobility components or 8 points or more for PIP mobility descriptor moving around. So just getting the higher rate for PIP mobility components doesn't automatically entitle you to a Blue Badge. It needs to be 8 points or more for the moving around descriptor. So you might have an award of 12 points for the planning and following a journey descriptor, but that wouldn't automatically entitle you to a Blue Badge unless you get the 8 points or more. In the event that you don't score the 8 points for that descriptor, you can still apply for a Blue Badge. You would need to apply via the local authority and go through their application process and provide evidence, possibly have an assessment in order to qualify. The disabled person's bus pass. This is again something that you can apply via your local authority. It entitles the holder of the bus pass to free off-peak bus travel. Now, in the event that the holder needs to have a companion with them whilst travelling, they may be able to also claim a companion pass, which offers the same concessions if someone is needing to travel with you. Just some useful contact information for DWP, so the Disability Living Allowance Helpline, the PIP Inquiry Line, and the Carers Allowance Inquiry Lines. The first are only open 9 till 5, whereas the Carers Allowance Inquiry Line gives you an extra hour open until 6 PM. And here's one of my wife's favourite TV presenters, Fiona Bruce, which must mean now it's question time. So I'll pass back over to my colleagues. Just hold the Q&A if there's any questions come through. If anybody would like to issue any questions, do feel free. I can answer them now. I think we did have one question come through about, do savings affect benefit entitlements? Potentially they do. So PIP and DLA are classed as non-means tested benefits, so any savings will not affect entitlement to PIP or DLA. However, means tested benefits such as universal credit savings would affect entitlement to those. There are savings thresholds, so the first £6,000 of capital that's held is disregarded. Anything between 6 and 15,999 would reduce the entitlement to benefit, although not totally end it. But any capital of over £16,000 would mean that there would be no entitlement to any means tested benefits. That's the current thresholds. Again, if you need to discuss any specifics, please do feel free to drop me a line regarding that. think I could pass back to Sarah then.
Hello. Thank you so much, Omar. That was really informative and helpful. I hope everybody's found that really useful. If anybody has any more questions, then obviously you could contact us at Jigsaw if you are a member or would like membership with us. We support anybody in the Bristol and Gloucestershire area. Or I know Omar's provided his details directly. There's a question just come through that says, at what age does a young person become eligible for universal credit?
So it depends. If they're in full-time mainstream education, it would be after they've completed full-time mainstream education. If they're in specialist provision, then potentially they could be entitled from age 16, but that would have to be in a specialist non-mainstream provision. But following that, then it would generally be 18 and above once they've completed full-time mainstream education.
Okay, I hope everybody's found that session really useful. And we'll wrap things up. Thank you ever so much, Omar. And thank you to all our attendees.